you for joining me for this episode of Spectrum Talk, featuring the incredibly impactful and inspiring philanthropist and president and CEO of the Women's Foundation of Colorado, Ms. Lauren Casteel. Ms. Casteel, thank you so much for sharing your time with me today.
It's my pleasure, Ruby, I have to tell you. I'm looking forward to our conversation and I appreciate the invitation.
Well, I'm looking forward to it as well. Let me just tell you. Now, I think it's important for you all to know just how amazing Miss Castile is. She has won many accolades for her years of dedicated service throughout Colorado communities, including the honor of an induction into the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame in 2014. She is the first person to lead three foundations, including the Hunt Alternatives Fund, the Temple Hoyne Buell Foundation, and the Denver Foundation. And now, after 30 years of philanthropic leadership and nearly 10 years as the president of the Women's Foundation of Colorado, Ms. Castile has announced that she will be retiring in January 2025. So, first of all, thank you so much for your commitment to our communities and congratulations on your retirement.
Well, thank you, Ruby. And I need to clarify one thing. I was not CEO. I was one of the senior staff VPs at the Denver Foundation, but I was there under the leadership of David Miller. And I also want to thank Denver Urban Spectrum. I received a legacy award from you, and I have a gorgeous piece that was given to me as my award. And then also had the good fortune to have been interviewed previously for an edition of Urban Spectrum. So thank you for the role that Urban Spectrum has played throughout its history within our communities. It's a vital voice, and I congratulate you on your recent leadership appointment. So
Oh,
brava.
thank you so much. It's hard not to keep an eye on you and the work that you've been doing in Colorado. So your role has been tremendously impactful in our communities. And so I applaud you as well. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I should have brought that Ed Dwight statue.
Oh,
Held it up. It's so gorgeous.
it is.
Yeah,
He's
it's gorgeous.
fantastic. Yeah,
Mhm.
and it's such an honor to have him as part of our community. I had the honor of covering some of his story back in 2023 for the Denver Film Festival. His
Mm.
Space Race movie was coming
Yes,
out, and
I
that
was
was
there.
just thrilling. Yeah, it's so great that he's part of our community as well. We have some great people here in Colorado.
We really do. We really
Yeah.
do. And I was thrilled when I was there for Space Race at the
Hmm.
museum. And he, within the film, and then Ed, of course, personally acknowledged the role that my father played in his
Yeah.
becoming an astronaut, which I hadn't anticipated, but was really thrilling for me.
Yes. Well, National Philanthropy Day was on November 7th and this year. And on that day, you delivered a very passionate and reflective speech. You received a Lifetime Achievement Award, which is amazing, from the Colorado chapter of the Association of Fundraising Professions. And you spoke about your journey as a philanthropist and all of the many lives you've touched along the way. But there was one quote in particular that really stood out to me, and that was, others often believed in me more than I believed in myself. And, I would just love for you to share that transformational moment when other people's beliefs in you transformed into you believing in yourself and your ability to make an impact. And, as a follow up to that, what do you think is so important about reaching down to lift someone up?
Well, I'm now just going to speak personally, as I will throughout this conversation. This isn't just a women's foundation conversation, it is a personal one. But when I arrived in Colorado in 1974, the reality is, Ruby, that I was um, poised to lose my potential. I don't like to think that I was broken, but I certainly had parts of myself that had been broken as a result of a series of traumas,
Mm.
one of which involved violent assault when I was in Eastern Europe. And the reason for that was very explicit when the perpetrator was caught. that I was young, Black, American from a foreign country. I didn't speak the language, female, and I was temporarily disabled. I was on crutches
Mm.
at the
Oh
time.
my.
So all of those components of my identity made me vulnerable to this particular violent assault. Then 6 months later, my father and my grandfather died within 2 weeks of each other. And then
Oh,
my closest friend was killed a year after them. So it was a tough 18 months.
yeah.
Ultimately, excuse me, ultimately, that's why I brought tea with me. I um, I ended up being disenrolled from college
Oh,
because I was unable to focus. I didn't know the word trauma. I didn't know the word depressed. In
mm,
1971, had I gone to, or 74, I guess it was about then, had I gone to the health center, they might have given me an aspirin or asked me if I needed birth control. Like
oh,
that just, mental health was not a part of the context of our conversations, and there was a significant stigma around it at that time. So I literally just sort of slid off into um, a dark place
yeah.
for myself. No drugs, no alcohol. I need to be clear about that. Had I been asked, I would have just said that I was overwhelmingly sad. That
Mm,
was probably the only word that I had. So I ended up moving to Colorado soon after I was disenrolled from one of the top colleges in the country. I was ashamed of this perceived failure, in addition to the other issues that I was struggling with. I ended up working on an assembly line, storage technology for a period of time. I worked for a fashion bar, Crossroads Shopping Center in Boulder for a little bit. And then I was encouraged. My mother connected me to someone she knew who was involved, a professor at the University of Colorado, Denver.
mm-hmm.
And she talked me into going back to school. We were able to identify that instead of English literature, that had been my original major, I hated John Donne, then I have to say, classical English literature was not working for me. Um, but communications really did.
Mm-hmm.
Because to me, that was about human connection.
Right.
Um, and the ability to use one's voice. So I graduated from the University of Colorado that and had incredible professors who encouraged me. Many of the other students at that time were returning to school. Most of us were older, working full time, and completing degrees that had been interrupted for different reasons. And then a student suggested that I apply. Sharon Leventhal, who was the producer of Colorado Woman magazine,
Oh,
uh,
cool.
talked me into applying for a job in media. And then Bev Martinez hired me at Channel 2, and I had no skills or experience in that context. But she told me if I worked hard, that at a very entry level of the station, that other opportunities would be available. So
Wow.
those are some examples of along the way of people. And then Mayor Pena, who hired me as the first press secretary ever for the city and county of Denver, I made up the state of the city as a vehicle for his message. No one can ever not do the state of the city. I take great joy in that. Um, and then Swanee Hunt introduced me to philanthropy. And again, I had no actual experience. But what I would also say to this audience, Ruby, was that throughout those early years, Syl Morgan was another one at Channel 2. So I ended up taking over Syl's program, Black Spectrum, and then Catch Two, and some other community-based programming.
Nice.
But the other thing is that I didn't have role models. I
Mm,
was early, oftentimes the only within the fields that I was moving, and certainly in philanthropy, certainly in the city in that role, and not having role models um, was challenging for me.
right.
I felt like I was just constantly doing improv,
Uh,
that I was making stuff up, that somehow there would be this veil ripped off and people would be saying, she's a fraud or something like. Um,
yeah.
so I guess, those represent some of those moments. To your other question about reaching back,
Mm,
I want your audience to know I am not a good formal mentor.
mm,
So if you want to meet with me every Tuesday from 2 to 3 o'clock, or go through some process or something of that sort, I'm not good at that kind of structure. What I have done, to the point that I've had staff say to me, you can't spend that much time, is that I will simply meet with people who reach out on occasion for a half hour, 45 minutes, usually one time, um, and try to just lift them up, answer some specific questions that they may have. And then I'm very much a people person.
mhm,
So tonight, you and I will see each other at an event this evening,
yeah.
and you'll see me hugging everyone, engaging with them in some way that, again, that human connection to me that says, I see you, I hear you in this moment, you have my full attention, I hope has some meaning, just on a human level, in particular for women of color.
Wow. Well, I must say, first of all, you are full of wisdom, and the journey that you taken to this point in your career has allowed you to learn so much about different industries, about how to interact with people in different platforms and environments. And I just admire that a lot. I think as you're talking about your early journey and your early experiences and being in that kind of dark place, it's so relatable. And, to your point of not having formal mentorship be your greatest strength, I think that is hugely important. The fact that people can relate to you, not only, where you are now and wanting to aspire to be at that same level, but feeling themselves in that same place and knowing that they too can make it out of that dark place and move forward. So thank you for your inspiration. That's very, very profound and motivational for
Um,
sure.
well, I become uncomfortable when I hear that.
Uh,
So when you said the word wisdom, I looked at
yeah.
myself on camera, and the amount of gray that I have grown in recent years, and every time my barber cuts it over at House of Hair, and I comment on all the gray hair that's falling into my
Yeah.
lap, right? It's like I'm like, oh my God. And he always, Marcus will say to me, that's just wisdom, Miss Lauren. So
And it's
that's what I
beautiful.
associate with wisdom. I don't know
Wisdom
if I
is
have other kinds of
beautiful.
wisdom.
Absolutely. Another quote from your speech that when you received the Lifetime Achievement Award was that our fearlessness eases the fears of others. And the work that you've done at the Women's Foundation of Colorado has supported women at all stages of life through their career, through their personal lives, excuse me, but many times those women are living with a great deal of fear, and maybe they're experiencing transitions in their career or even their relationships and their personal lives. So, what's the driving force behind your own personal fearlessness, and how has the Women's Foundation of Colorado allowed you to ignite that same fearlessness in the women you've worked with?
I think I've referenced that somewhat already, Ruby. Um, having ultimately navigated my fear, and it wasn't just the people who helped me in a professional way who believed in me, but I'm a strong believer in therapy. I'm a strong believer in building community support networks. There are a lot of ways that we, and in particular, we as women of color, can come together in a healing kind of context, that it can be both traditional for us in a cultural sort of sense, and non-traditional in other ways, formal um, in terms of some of those resources and support. So I think that being able to say, um, what am I going to lose? um, Having
Yeah.
gone through that dark period, what can I lose by
Mm,
standing in support of others,
right.
who have worked harder and at greater risk than I ever have,
Wow.
people who are seen and unseen. And I think there was a moment of time in 1993 during the quote unquote summer of violence in Denver, when I showed up at Moyo and Guvu with Abayomi Meeks, who was meeting with Crip and Bloods leaders. There were probably 20 young men who were starting out with like this very physical sort of context, right, to release energy. And I showed up in my suit and simply sat on the side. And you could feel them get anxious at first, right? Most of them had shirts off. They had
Yeah.
um, some pretty aggressive tattoos, to be quite honest. And I just sat on the side. There was a chair there. So they sent one of them over to ask me, like, who are you and why are you here? And I said, I said, I have decided that I can either be a part of the solution or a part of the problem. But
Mhm.
first and foremost, I have to work through my fear. And my home in Park Hill, North Park Hill, had been in the middle, close to several of the shootings. Fence across the street said CK 47, Crip Killer 47, et cetera, et cetera. And I didn't want to move. So it was essential to me to name the anxiety, mother of young children, three young
Yeah.
children, for me to name that anxiety and stand in that space and see these young men as also having been broken and damaged
Wow.
and human and in need of healing. Um, for many of them, the outcomes ultimately were not good,
Right. Yeah.
was kind of the bottom line. But I can name them. I had dinner at my home. Like uh, that was critical. So the fearlessness, I think my fearlessness, and that was a bit extreme, did also ease their fears and those of other people who were around me. In terms of all of my professional career, uh, I am best as a transformative leader, coming in to shift an organization from one place to another. I'm not always as tactical or happiest in administration. My team will tell you that. Uh, but I have a brilliant team that complements all of, my skills and is many ways smarter than I am. But that big vision and my initial vision for the Women's Foundation was gender, racial, and economic equity. It
Hmm.
took a while to get there because you ultimately want other people to embrace that. One can't simply say, this is what we have to do. Well, sometimes you
Right.
do, but there was risk
Right.
associated with that. There was risk in some of the first grants through my CEO. I had a small CEO discretionary fund when I first started, um, and funded organizations that had never been funded by us.
For your discretionary
I had
fund?
a small discretionary fund. It's all gone,
Wow.
folks. Don't be calling me. It's gone. It's been gone. But when I first started, I had a discretionary fund. And I think that the intent was not that I would use it for grants,
Yeah.
but I could see and had relationships around gender, racial, and economic equity, and also gender expansiveness.
Mm,
When I worked for Swan, part of my history had been that we would fund things where an idea had literally been written on the back of an envelope or a napkin.
wow.
I
Wow.
literally. And we were early funders for programs and organizations such as Urban Peak or
Hmm.
Mikasa or Eulipians Theater, which I miss, Joe
Yeah.
Buttonfield, Eulipians Theater, because we believed in these community leaders, Cross Disability Coalition, Cross Community Coalition, Lorraine Granado. And so I came from a place where I had learned that philanthropy is our nation's risk capital,
Mm,
right? And so it wasn't fear. There was strategic intent, but also knowing that we couldn't always control the outcome.
right.
Our resources were certainly extremely valuable, but the knowledge of these leaders and their lived experience and their communities was, in fact, the key ingredient ultimately to their success even today. Women's Beam Project, I just got an email from them. Like the list goes on. At the Women's Foundation, the Women and Girls of Color Fund, I had done boys and men of color work before. And
Okay.
people were surprised, like, why are you going to the Women's Foundation? You're a BMOC person. And I said, if
Yeah.
you care about community, if you care about children, if you care about families, you can enter that house from a window, from a door, coming down the chimney. Like, it doesn't matter. It's
Mm,
about the people and hearing what they know and we trust is, in fact, a path to move forward and giving them um, some of that confidence, believing, back to believing
right.
in others, just to say, okay, we hear you and we trust you, and here are some resources went a long way. At the Buell Foundation, I transitioned them from buildings, the Buell Theater, right?
Right.
Is an obvious landmark for us into people and early childhood and children throughout the state. So for the first time, I was traveling around the state because I was my own program officer as well. Um,
Hmm.
and my bookkeeper began to do programming. One of the staff, assistants had to do. I was like, we all got to learn. We all got to travel around the state.
Yeah.
We all have to listen. And, one of the things that I'm most proud of was that we funded the Justice Center downtown off of Colfax Childcare Center.
Oh, yes.
Yes, yes. It was an idea. It
Yeah.
didn't exist. What we knew was that children were suffering sitting in courtrooms
Mm,
um, while their parents were involved in, some sort of case in the judicial system.
yeah.
So that's one example, but that's joy.
Right.
Was it a risk? I guess. I don't know. It just felt like the right thing to do.
Right.
And that's
I'm,
also true with our Women and Girls of Color Fund at the Women's Foundation
yeah.
and our Giving Direct Cash Assistance, our impact investing, our changing our portfolio to 100% gender lens. They're different, new, unique strategies, but they're not scary. But you
Mm,
also, I mean, you have to be smart about how you do it, but it's not scary.
right. Right. I was writing down Colfax not too long ago, and somebody asked about the space where that new is it a hotel that went up that's like the really cool
Oh,
design?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and
Uh-huh.
I mentioned the child care center, and I said, it was this place where if parents are struggling or if, caretakers are struggling and they're going to court, their kids don't have to be there. And it was this really cool thing where, the children were able to just be dropped off and
Hmm.
the parents could do what they need to do. And the person was from out of town and they were just like, okay, that's different, that's innovative, but that's so cool. That's so remarkable. Everything that you just said is remarkable and so selfless.
No, it's not.
Um, oh, it is. It's so
Okay.
selfless. The way that you envision change is really, really cool. And, I love something that you said about the healing. And I love that right now, what we're seeing from a societal lens is a lot of focus and attention, especially in communities of color, on healing and really putting a
Mhm.
voice to some of those traumas that generations before us didn't know how to do or didn't have the opportunity to do. I've always felt like when you're at rock bottom, that's the most transformational time in your life because there is nowhere else to go but up. And so I love that you said, what's the worst that could happen? What could go wrong if you're giving to someone? What's the worst that could happen? It doesn't work out. I love that you have been willing to take an idea, just something that was on someone's heart or something that someone recognized a need for and really pour into it, even from your own discretionary fund. That's just so cool. Oh, you're wonderful.
Oh, no.
Well,
No, no, no. Um, but yeah, those kids, when we talk about healing and when we talk about trauma, I
mhm,
gave examples of, an assault is a very overt form of trauma.
yeah,
Um, but we carry multi-generational trauma, as you alluded
right.
to. And even in the context of our families, where there may have been stories told and shared, or we're reading in history, or, oral tradition and history for us is so huge. But we carry within our bodies a level of trauma that's very difficult to articulate.
Mhm,
In my speech, I said I grow weary of crying ancient and ancestral tears.
mhm,
Sometimes things well up within me that I don't even know the source of. It's not like, oh, this happened, therefore I'm feeling this. It's
right,
some sense of knowing or feeling that's kind of intangible and so deep that it's really, and it can be good, right? It can be some joy that bubbles up. It doesn't have to be
right.
pain. It can be many things. Um, but yeah, pulling it all together in a healing context and certainly during uncertain times is important. Circle practice,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I don't want to take too much time dwelling on how much I love your words, but when you were talking about the Bloods and the Crips during the Summer of Violence and how you went and sat in with their conversation, it made me think of something I saw just yesterday. And it was a quote that was something like, most of the trouble in the world is because of people feeling or wanting to be noticed or wanting to feel valuable, is what it
Mhm.
was. And even your presence with them not knowing why you were there, probably worried, is she some sort of like court person or is she
Mhm.
the feds or something? Like
Mhm.
just the
Exactly.
fact that you were there and listening to whatever they had to say, it makes people feel valuable and it really creates a path forward. And I think that's tremendously powerful that you were able to sit there in the process of standing your ground in your community. That's something that I think social media has taken from us and just our tendency to move away from that person to person communication these days. We all want to feel valuable, and it's hard to do that behind a screen.
Yeah,
So,
no,
yeah.
social media has really done. One thing I do not suggest that people do, I jumped out of my car once on Colfax. I saw a situation of domestic violence and assault
Yeah.
between a man and a woman on the side of the road. And I pulled over and I got out of my car and went over there. And the man was so shocked that he actually
Mhm.
stopped and then she kind of took off and then he started yelling at me and I got back in my car and I thought that I just went too far.
Mm.
I just took my fearlessness a little too far.
But in the past in our community, that's the role of, the people who are considered the elders, the people who are the wise ones who have gone through life. They were supposed to be the ones to stand in the gap for the young people, for situations like that, for anything that wasn't right.
Hmm.
The fact that we no longer feel comfortable stepping in or using our voice to stop certain things, that's scary. And I
Yeah.
agree with you, that could have gone wrong. So
Yeah, it could have gone
don't
wrong,
do that.
but I didn't hesitate in the moment. Um,
Yeah.
but I did think about it afterwards because it could have gone really wrong.
Yeah.
Um, but I did feel it was my role of see something, say something, whatever. Like,
Yeah.
young man, stop.
Right.
Stop.
Right. I see you.
I see
Yeah.
you. I see you.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Well,
I think
well,
we
you
also
talked,
have to be thoughtful today.
yeah, that's very true and
Mhm.
careful. But you talked about risk. And, one of the questions that I have is that you're watching the world change and you have this unique lens that philanthropy offers. And so I can imagine that, especially in these recent years from the pandemic and all the things that have just been happening until now, there's been an increase in funding requests to support this changing economy, the changing social landscape that we're talking about now. So, what is the most challenging part of deciding which programs and
Ooh.
initiatives to take that risk and support?
One of the things that I miss personally is that I don't do that as much directly anymore.
Mm,
Um, my traveling around the state, reading all the proposals, doing the site visits, things of that sort. And we have an amazing team and a participatory grant making process of community members for both of our key grant making programs. When comes, so I do review public policy, but the other ones of direct service, I don't, and the Women and Girls of Color Fund, I don't. What I can go back to in terms of my history and what I know our teams and volunteers, staff and volunteers would say today. For example, we had 153 applicants for our last round with a request total with requests totaling $8 million. And
wow.
yeah, and we have a million to give. So right then and there, one goes into the process knowing that 1/8 of those proposals will be declined, that we will
Wow.
not have the resources. And that is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Obviously, among those, there are some that, and good on folks who tried. They may not actually meet the criteria, but it never hurts to put the question out there, right?
Right.
Because we might refer them to someone else for whom they're a better fit or see other partnerships or opportunities. But you know, to decline and philanthropy is a privilege.
Right.
As I say, those folks who are in the trenches, who are doing direct service, under very difficult circumstances with populations who are under even more excruciating situations and circumstances. I'm not going to compare when I say philanthropy is hard, I'm not comparing that, right? But it can be heartbreaking in its own way.
Right.
So yes, there's a process. We use a process where people can call our um, program staff and ask questions before they apply to make sure they understand. We try to keep it not overly complex for folks to fill out because people don't have, and many times I don't know that they should have a grant writer
Right.
doing the work. And then, we have very, very deep conversations about those that are ultimately selected. I remember, and we've done first grant. Chic is an example. Sade Cooper is an
Yeah.
example where we were first grant
Wow.
for them as well. And here they are. today with, the justice for Black people. But one of the things that I've never forgotten when I was at Hunt Alternatives Fund, and again, the requests far exceeded the resources available. And while we felt really, really good about the decisions that we had made, um, Swanee looked at me and said, we just declined babies with AIDS,
Oh no, yeah.
right?
It's hard.
It's hard.
Yeah.
That's hard. Um, and so, those kinds of moments in philanthropy come up. So, as a community funded foundation, that's why we are constantly raising funds, is to help us support the community and to expand our capacity to share the resources that are necessary. But it's also
Sure.
not just about money, it's providing technical assistance, connections to others. There are a lot of connections to each other.
Right.
Our grantees work in a cohort, and it's provided real strength to have public policy and direct service together. So, philanthropy has an obligation to not only write a check, but to be a full and active partner with the communities that we serve. And many of them are known and unknown, seen and unseen. Um, Women in rural communities, immigrant communities, transgender, LGBTQ communities, women with disabilities, women who've experienced domestic violence, women who need support in building the economic security for their families. They might need transportation support. There are many, many circumstances for helping to see a woman and trust a woman throughout our state, and the programs that we support to adapt and adjust their programs as needed. The other thing is, back to proposals. I remember years ago, there was a program that I had been involved in funding at Hunt Alternatives Fund, and then they came before me um, at one of my other foundations.
Hmm.
And um, and so I had been very familiar with them. It
Right.
was a youth program. I've been very familiar with them. And I got this proposal, and it said something like, we seek to empower the entrepreneurial assets of, the youth who are marginalized by whatever. And I called up the executive director and I said, don't you teach kids to silk screen t-shirts and sell them so they
Hmm.
can learn business skills and financial skills? And he said, yes. And I said, why didn't you say that? Like, I didn't
Ah,
understand, I didn't recognize
too
it.
much jargon.
It was just, I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I've watched them silk screening. I've been like,
Yeah.
I've been there. And I thought, did you change? And so my advice to people who may be seeking grants in any capacity is, keep it simple, keep it honest, keep it authentic. But that, remember, it cracked me up. We endeavor to empower the entrepreneurial. It's like, whoa,
But how?
what?
That's great
I don't know what
advice to
that
keep it
means.
simple. Yeah. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Well, you have such a really unique and comprehensive view of grants. What kinds of grants are needed? What kinds of grants will help? What kind of funding? What kind of interest? How you can make an impact, right? So, when it comes to the current conditions facing particularly communities of color, and maybe we'll speak to the Black community, both here in Colorado and throughout the United States, and dare I say, after the recent elections and just with everything that's happening in the world. In your opinion, what areas do you believe that we should be focused on to achieve more equitable conditions for our children, for our families? Where should we really start doing that work to
Yeah.
advance?
Well, I think our involvement of with women, as I mentioned, I've done boys and men of color work, and boys and men of color certainly. are showing evidence of their own struggles. But one of the things that we've learned is that for many, the health and well-being of their mom, the mental health, the financial health, the spiritual health, whatever, the full composition of what makes up one's health is critical.
Yeah.
The number of single moms with throughout our state and within our communities uh, has grown exponentially
Mm,
over decades. There is a normative aspect to it, but the exhaustion of women who might be working two jobs, who may perhaps be receiving benefits, but they can't pick up. I always use this example, a rotisserie chicken on the way home with their
right.
SNAP benefits because it's pre-prepared. Um, you know, the angst and the agony now of housing, affordable housing,
Yeah.
is critical. So helping women to have good jobs and the resources of transportation, stable housing, food insecurity, that there is food insecurity in the United States of America is
Crazy.
unconscionable to me. It is
Yeah.
unconscionable to me. And I believe that uh, I don't know that that inflation, as people are concerned about it now, even though it was actually decreasing, but I
Hmm.
don't know what future policies there will be and how those might affect um, uh, access to food as well. So it's
Right.
something we have to pay attention to. Education. Uh,
Yeah.
I I was very fortunate, grew up all in public schools except for 1 year. Um, and I had a great education, and a
Mm,
great education. And we are failing our children in our educational system, um, what we're teaching, how we're teaching, um, uh, helping Black students to understand the richness of their history, to have
mm,
faith of and belief without internalized oppression
right.
and internalized racism. I think sometimes about the Negro national anthem and, the hope that the dark days have brought us. I'm not sure people are feeling that right now,
Mm,
um, but uh, it is from where we come and where we dig deep. So the Negro National Anthem, which in some places folks have not been allowed to sing it,
right.
right? They
Right.
haven't been they haven't been allowed to sing it. So, but I think it's it's back to that healing, to be honest. And I mentioned circle practice earlier with elders and with youth, and sometimes it's women to women, and sometimes it's men to men, and sometimes it's both. It just depends. Some folks find that through their faith spaces. Uh, I don't particularly care what it looks like. Um, and and I also think it's okay, rather than turning anger on oneself.
Hmm.
I know of a group that is going to be addressing rage, and they're going to have people breaking plates
I love that.
and stuff, right? In a contained space,
Yeah.
not a rage room, but some other contained sort of healing space. There are a lot of ways that we need to address. So I don't have any magic. My father, Whitney Young Jr., um, would be or is uh, stunned. He died at 49, having been a part of the signing of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. Any
Wow.
of the regression or retrenchments that we're seeing either in our democracy, in our education. He was an architect of Head Start, the war on poverty, affirmative action. Um, he and Martin and John Lewis and Dorothy Height, I mean, all of them had seen these as building blocks that would continue to build for the future.
Right.
We have to remain vigilant, but first we have to find that path to healing and self-reflection, um,
Yeah.
and to begin to build that reservoir for ourselves.
Wow. Well, you grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, and
No,
what
I was born there, but only
born
lived there
there?
3 years, 3 months. I'm sorry.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
moved to Atlanta
Oh,
3 months
okay.
after I was born. So I actually don't
Wow.
know Omaha at all, but it's on my birth
It's a
certificate.
very different environment then. I was gonna ask what the impact of Omaha was on your upbringing, but Atlanta, you were around a whole bunch of Black power in
Yeah,
that side.
yeah,
Wow, okay.
yeah. No, Omaha. Thank you, Omaha. Doctor's Hospital birthed me. So I am grateful to Omaha for that. But yeah, we moved in 1950, January of 54,
Mhm.
to Atlanta, Georgia.
Wow.
So that was the Jim Crow segregated South. My father was dean of the School of Social Work at what is now Clark Atlanta University. My mom taught at Spelman, and we lived in this all Black community. And when we talk about philanthropy, Ruby, um, I think most communities of color, certainly Black communities, but I wouldn't have known that word, but I had clear evidence of how we supported each other. So Ms.
Mm,
Barrett, who took the bus until there were boycotts, but she would walk me to school on her way to the bus to go clean houses in the white neighborhoods.
uh-huh.
Food was shared, childcare was shared, elder care was shared, medical skills, home repair, gardening, you name it, right?
Yeah.
Everybody helped each other in that way. And so Julian Bond lived next door, and we lived in these little tiny bungalows, and there were apartments around, and but still felt relatively small. Pascal's, the big restaurant in the airport now, right?
Uh-huh.
ATL, was this tiny little, the only Black restaurant, and we went
Wow.
there for dinner once a week, and it was kind of a communal, space. Uh, People with disabilities among our neighbors, but Julian Bond, who went on to become the first Black legislator, taught me how to tie my shoes. I
Mm.
was running down the sidewalk with my, pigtails flying behind me, and he snatched me up and sat me down on the steps and said, "You're not going anywhere till you learn how to tie your shoes. Lauren, do you know how to tie your shoes?" And
Uh,
but that had a huge impact on me.
yeah.
And of course, we weren't able. I rarely remember going. I don't remember going downtown. Boycotts were happening,
Hmm.
certainly at lunch counters and at stores. But I remember so I don't remember being in those spaces, but I do remember walking the sidewalks and the colored only water fountains, restrooms. All of those were very apparent. Probably the earliest words I could read among the
Wow.
earliest words were white and colored.
Mm.
Um, and but the civil rights movement was percolating all around me. So there'd be these spaghetti dinners at our house or someplace else that were, strategic meetings, even though I didn't know that at the
Right.
time. I was 7 when we left, uh, but I could feel it.
Mm.
And then when we left Atlanta, Philanthropy, the Rockefeller Foundation, gave my father a fellowship to Harvard before he took over the National Urban League and became one of the big six, so to speak, of the civil rights movement,
Yeah.
which doesn't include enough women or really all the people who were involved. But the other thing that I learned was that, like, Martin brought the faith community. My father brought education and corporate sector. John
Mm.
Lewis brought youth. Dorothy Height brought, women. A. Philip Randolph was labor, was everybody. Roy Wilkinson Legal Defense Fund, NAACP Legal Defense Fund. So all of everybody had a role. They didn't always agree. I could hear
Right.
that sometimes, right? I knew that,
Yeah.
but they could wrestle with stuff. The March on Washington is a classic example of that. That was not one person. People think of it, and Martin's speech is iconic, right?
Right.
His speech is iconic. But what happened in the organization, Bayard Rustin, right? Finally, the movie Rustin just came out,
Hmm.
was many, 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 many people, and also um, white people, and many other diverse faiths, etc., who were on the mall of the Washington uh, Memorial and the Lincoln Memorial along that runway. But
Hmm.
we forget that sometimes.
Right.
We forget the community organizing that actually went on behind the the bus boycotts. Right? That
Right.
was
Right.
huge. It was
Hmm.
brilliant. It was brilliant. So, yeah. I don't know what
Even
you
as
asked me, but
well,
I
no,
just went
you
off on a
answered it.
tangent.
You answered it. You answered it. And it was a huge light bulb moment. A lot of the people that you're naming and a lot of the scenarios you're naming have been kind of cast in this fairy tale Hollywood light. And to hear about your lived experience is very powerful because I think we need to be reminded of one thing that you just said, which was the answer to the question, is the spirit of giving among us and what community actually means and stood for in those times and why we were able to make progress in those times. I feel like that's a huge component that's missing from now. But
Yeah.
I have one last question for you because I don't
Yes.
want to take up too much of your time. I know you will be having a fabulous retirement celebration this afternoon. So I want to know, as you retire, do you think you'll actually stop working, or are you going to pursue a passion project that's going to keep you involved in philanthropy or in community in some way? Or are you just like, I need to rest and put my feet up and take a trip?
Um, I'm going to begin with what I call radical rest, and I'm very, very serious about that. Um, I need to slough off a lot
Mm,
of layers to get to who I am and not just what I do.
mm.
I want to schlep around, and people don't know this, but my favorite article of clothing is actually a hoodie. And I have this hoodie
Oh,
that has the Black Liberation flag on it. Yeah, I love a hoodie. I want to schlep around for a while. I want to read. I haven't read um, things that weren't specific to what I do in far too long. I
yeah,
love literature.
yeah.
Um, and so Jesmyn Ward is one of my favorite authors, and I'm behind on her work. There's some of our earlier authors I'd love to go back to and read as well. I've been taking like dance lessons,
Oh,
Latin
nice.
dance lessons. Oh, I'm terrible. I do them privately. Yeah. I'm not, yeah, I don't know if I'll be continuing that, but I want to discover um, maybe instead of that kind of structure, I want to walk in the park and the botanic gardens and reconnect with nature. I have
Mm,
terrible health habits,
yeah.
horrible, horrible. The fact that I actually chug along through life unscathed is a miracle, and it's going to catch up with me one day. Um, but, I don't know what I'm trusting because throughout my life, opportunity has come uh, and and I guess I've had the fearlessness to say, what's the worst that could happen? I guess they could fire me. That could
Right.
happen, right? I don't know. Uh, but I want to see what opens up.
Right.
I also know I'm on the board of Colorado Health Foundation and will continue there. Folks, I don't review proposals. I'm on the board, so I'm not a program officer. But but in any case, I want to be able um to ask myself some of the tough questions,
Love that.
some of which you have asked. Jot down some notes. I'll never write a book. And then I want something that's more tactical in my life,
Okay.
um, a little bit more grassroots, where people don't know who I am, where I can just be in my hoodie,
I love that.
you know, and have that kind of real community
Hmm.
um, and human experience at its deepest level. So I don't know, Ruby. I've never had a plan. I've never had a five. That's why I'm also a bad mentor. People always say, "What was your 5-year plan?" I'm like, I don't know. I never had one.
Well,
I don't know.
the fact that you're planning for radical rest is amazing. That's awesome and you deserve it. I wish you all the best in your next phase of life, and I know that whatever opens up will be just as wonderful as all of the things that you've done all of these years. So
Thank you.
thank you. Yeah, and I really hope that you have a great time at your party later today. And
Thank
thank you
you.
for joining me. Yeah, thank you for sharing some of your time with me today. It's
My
been really
pleasure.
wonderful.
Yeah, the first thing I'm going to do is learn how to sleep. I think I sent an email this morning at 5:15 a.m. So that's
Oh,
actually the number one thing that I'm going to do. I hope I
blackout
make it through the
curtains.
event. Yeah. So hugs to you, much love. Um, I want you to know that you are showing gifts in this interview, your
Oh, thank
listening
you.
ability, your the research that you've done, the warmth and sincere interaction. I look forward to watching your journey, and
Oh,
we will connect again. I'm confident.
thank
Okay.
you so, so much.
You're
And
very, very welcome. Thank you,
yeah,
Ruby.
thank
Okay,
you
take
all
care.
for tuning in. Sure. To learn more about the Women's Foundation of Colorado and the wonderful work they do to support Colorado's women and children, visit WFCO.org. And you can find Miss Casteel on LinkedIn at Lauren Y. Casteel. Do not ask her to review your grants. She's not going to be doing
I'm not going
that.
to do it. I also don't manage my own LinkedIn, so it might go away when I retire.
Oh, well, that's even
I don't
better.
know.
Social media
I'm not
free.
on any social media personally.
I love that. I need to take that advice. But thank you so much for watching. I'm Ruby Jones, and I will see you next time. Take care.
All right. Thank you.